tuning in early. They're usually late. What's going on? My name is Nick Dagan Best, and this is the lovely and talented Patrick Watson, and we are astrologers, if you can believe it. And we're here to talk astrology. And how you doing, Watson?
I'm celebrating the last day of Mars being in Leo.
Oh,
I'm happy that it's on its way.
are you? Okay.
Yeah, it's been a lot of an unusual amount of scrapes and cuts and bruises and burns. I just got
Really?
sunburned quite a bit
Oh,
this week. So it's yeah, I'm done with Mars being my first.
oh,
How
okay.
about you?
Yeah, no, I'm okay. I'm feeling like an orphan. My wife and stepkids have gone back to South Africa for the summer, so I'm home alone. And
I'm sorry.
yeah, someone's got to maintain the household here. But yeah, I'm just kind of, sad at being disconnected from my family. This has been our life for the past 2 years, with a lot of back and forth and periods of having to be apart. So in one sense, we're getting used to it. It's not forever. It's just as we make this transition of moving from one continent to another, and all the sort of details that we have to deal with.
So, in other words, Saturn ruling your seventh and being placed in the ninth house of long distance travel.
Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. Yeah, I'm in an Aquarius perfection year. So, Saturn, while Saturn was in Aquarius, that accounted for a lot of the absence. And then right when it went into Pisces, just before it went into Pisces, my dad was sick and I had to be in Montreal and all that stuff. Yeah, and then with my next birthday, I go into a Pisces perfection year where Saturn currently is. So, yeah, Saturn's following me around, and there's a lot of being alone.
Right.
I'm so alone.
I'm sorry to hear that, but at least you got everyone here.
At
Hello,
least I have everyone
everyone.
here. Yeah, yeah.
Looks like everyone's saying hello.
Watson and 27 viewers on my visible on my YouTube. I don't think that's everyone who watches. I don't think I get all the numbers. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how Restream works. It's bizarre.
Yeah, there's so many channels now being involved that it's hard to tell
Right.
exactly where everyone's coming from. Hello, everyone. Everyone's
Hello,
saying
everyone.
hello. Okay,
Hello,
yes,
hello.
hello. All right.
You all love me.
Um,
Oh, I got to try harder to shake that off.
yeah,
So,
I don't know if the
uh,
frame will be able to contain your head if it gets any larger.
oh, good grief. So sunburned, huh?
Oh, the astrology podcast is back.
Oh, not that
Um,
guy. Oh, not
yeah,
that guy.
this is something I've noticed a lot with like Mars transits here and there. Like, obviously, with this time Mars transiting through my first house, having more martial things that have happened to the body, including burns. But even actually, it's really funny. I remember back when I was recording the rectification course with Chris Brennan. I went out to Denver, and Chris and I were looking at the transits for that week as we were sort of trying to plan out our schedule for how we were going to do the recordings for the course. And one of the days we saw there was going to be like this Moon Mars square. And we thought, you know what, maybe that will just be like our off day so that we don't get, sort of at each other's throats or something, while we're recording this course. Let's just take that day off to kind of rest and recuperate because it's pretty intensive days of recording. So we took that day off, and so the moon was square Mars that day, and we went out to drink some like bubble tea, or went to this like sort of coffee place, and
That
we were
sounds
having
like an afternoon
smoothies.
with Chris.
We were having smoothies, and we were sitting outside, and it was great conversation as it always is, but the sun was just so strong that day, so we both got, pretty burnt just from sitting outside talking to each other. So like,
You would have been safer
yeah,
inside recording a podcast.
probably,
Yeah, yeah.
like the Moon Mars squares, or rather Mars interactions. I think that was kind of what that Moon Mars square was sort of about. our body's getting singed by the sun. So I've just noticed that a lot, that like Mars really does have that connection to things getting burned or heated or fried. That's grilled. You
Right.
choose your cooking
Baked.
method. It cooks. It's and I think Mars is a pretty good representative even of chefs and like working in a kitchen. Right? It's hot.
Yeah.
It's loud.
There's a
There's
lot of
knives.
knives. Yeah.
There's chopping. Anyone who's
Yeah.
worked in like a
Oh,
busy
sure.
kitchen can probably recognize it's just a bit of a war zone.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the
I
domain of
worked
Mars.
I worked as a busboy and a waiter, and so yeah, you didn't work in the kitchen, but you had to go in and out a whole lot, and yeah, it's mayhem in there, and there's a hierarchy too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Any Mars situation has to be firmly managed with a hierarchy, but yeah, there's a lot of knives involved.
Yeah. I worked in food for a little bit. I just worked at like my college cafeteria. I was like I sort of became the omelet guy in the mornings.
Oh
So
yeah,
like there was like a couple semesters where I was like up really early in the morning making omelets for people, and I became really good at making omelets.
that
I'm making
that
like four at a time.
that nickname's gonna stick now. I'm gonna call you omelet guy.
Oh gosh. But yeah, not much chopping, just serving and kind of keeping every
Yeah, the lunch
pan
lady, huh? The
occupied.
lunch lady. Yeah, yeah. That's a good gig.
Is that my nickname, the lunch lady? All right, looks like. So, or I want to just check the comments here. Someone said I have Mars retro and Cancer, hardly ever cook and never cook for other people. Recently tweaked, I've got my natal South Node conjunct Mars and Algol. I can't say I notice anything particular about the conjunctions in Taurus, though, so maybe the bull blocks it all. Uh have you ever looked at like any sort of famous chef charts? Like one of the charts I kind of like to look at is Gordon Ramsay, because we have a time for him. And so it's kind of funny. I don't know if, well, I guess I could bring it up. He's on Astro Databank.
Yeah. To answer your question, I've looked at Anthony Bourdain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Isn't he Mars in Cancer? Do you know?
No, he's probably Mars in Pisces because he's a 1956 red 3. So it's either going to be Mars in Aquarius or Pisces. I mean, 1956 is one of those years. It's the year of the Mars retrograde in Pisces, which, as you know, doesn't happen very often. Would not happen again until 2003. So yeah, you get one of those years when there's going to be a Mars retrograde, and half that year Mars will be in that sign. And so 1956, it's a good bet that Mars only transited through 2 or 3 signs over the course of that whole year. So what you doing here? Gordon Ramsay?
Oh, yeah. I'm trying to find you here. Okay, there we go. So I'm trying to share my screen. And we'll do the entire screen. No.
As soon as it pops up, then I have to share it. There we are.
All right, so here's Gordon Ramsay, born November 8th, 1966 at 6:05 p.m. in Johnstone, Scotland. It's an A time. And I think it's just really funny that he is Gemini rising with the ruler being Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius in the 7th, because like this is a guy who's known for kind of having a mouth.
Yeah.
He's got a mouth on him. If you've watched any of his shows, he's frequently swearing and shouting at people, sometimes very humorously.
I've never watched his show, and I know
No.
that's what he does.
Yeah, so I just think it's kind of funny. Like you have, basically Mercury with, this cantankerous Mars, Pluto, Uranus, Moon.
Right. Likes to point out that people are doing things wrong. You're doing it wrong. You call that a stew?
Right. I also just think it's funny that he has this huge sort of buildup of Mars, with Mars conjunct Pluto and Uranus, and even proximity to the Moon, given that he sort of has that general sort of martial nature. And then of course, what does he do? He's a chef, right?
Right.
He's chopping stuff up. I don't know I don't know if there's like a signature for chefs, but I would almost think Mars would be
Mars moon stuff, the moon's got to be like, taste and flavor, that sort of tactile relationship. It's what you eat, what you take in, so there's that consciousness to it. It's curious, I noticed his ascendant is 24 Gemini, so I don't remember him, I don't follow Gordon Ramsay very closely, but I'd be curious to know what that Mars retrograde station on his ascendant last Halloween was like. Where's his career these days? Does he still have a TV show?
Lost Halloween. Don't you mean
2022.
Lost? Oh,
Mars went retrograde at 25 Gemini last Halloween.
Oh, right. Sorry, I thought you were
and
talking
his ascendant is 24 Gemini.
Right, so it got hit by that. Yeah, I see what you're saying. So Mars hit that retrograde station right around his ascendant.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I haven't been keeping track of him lately. Let's see, what has he been up to lately?
Yeah, I don't watch a lot of cook. I mean, when I was younger, I used to watch Iron Chef. That was fun. The original Japanese one. Then eventually it just got silly and too big for its own good. And then when I was a kid, I used to watch a lot of cooking shows because, like a lot of Gen Xers, I was a latchkey kid and had to fix my own lunch. So, are you seeing anything there?
There's a lot. He's quite busy still, so I'm just looking at all of the. It looks like the sort of nearest event at the time from when Mars went retrograde I can find was he was on this like celebrity special for this show Gogglebox or something, but I'm not exactly seeing something sort of pop out. I mean, it could be that this is something which was somehow not very public. I know one of the kind of maybe more personal things that seems to have popped up for him, and I mean, I don't know the specifics of the situation. I'm not saying this is true necessarily, but I know there's been sort of rumors at certain points that he has had like affairs on his wife, and so he has the ruler of his first house at Mercury in the 7th, and sometimes Mercury in the 7th house, a lot of like some of the traditional delineations of Mercury in the 7th speak to sort of being sort of tricksy or a certain degree of fluidity in relationships or multiple marriages or things like that. So I think that's kind of interesting that like of all the things, that he could be sort of criticized for or that there would be rumors about, that's kind of an area where
right. That reminds me of this. I'm just going to quickly share my screen for a second just to show this meme that I saw just the other day involving him. There you are. There's the meme. So just, I wouldn't normally show this in a live stream, but given what you're talking about,
oh my gosh,
given what you're talking about, it kind of, supports the case. Anyway, sorry folks for people who didn't want to see that kind of, like I said, it's not something I would usually share on the live stream, but it seemed to be appropriate for the topic. So yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
Someone said he's kind of going through a Mars return and Saturn return. Something kind of interesting that happened in the year of his Saturn return is really when he kind of made it as a chef. That's he basically a previous boss had given him some money to like open up this restaurant of his own. And so I forget what the name of it was, someplace in London. And that was when he won his like first Michelin star, was when because he has Saturn in Pisces in the 10th, ruling the midheaven in Aquarius. And what's kind of funny about that is, with the midheaven pointing into the 9th house, sometimes the topics of the MC and the 9th can sort of become conflated in a 9th house context, or in a horse sign houses context. And so he's someone who was born in Scotland, but has developed a fairly impressive like international
Hmm.
sort of popularity for himself. He's on, like, I mean, even my kids talk about Gordon Ramsay because he's like big on TikTok and big on these other social media websites. So I guess what I'm saying is the fact that he has the ruler of the MC in the ninth and the 10th, and the fact that the MC is in the ninth seems to emphasize this idea that his reputation would sort of go to faraway places from the place of his birth. He's someone who kind of whose appeal, reached uh, distant shores.
For sure, for
Um,
sure, for sure.
and so when Saturn went through Pisces, I believe that was when he actually got that was when he got his first Michelin star, and he sort of that was when he really became kind of a big deal. Now that Saturn's returned to that place, I think he like he's bought up that old location. Like
Oh, okay.
he sort of because I guess it changed hands or something, but he like eventually got back. He got that restaurant back. I think I'm getting that right. I hope I'm not completely misleading people, but I haven't been keeping track of his story in a while. I know about his Saturn return because I covered him as one of my Saturn and Pisces examples um, for my video that I was selling, Saturn and Pisces Thirst Trap. Uh, uh, well, like I said, it was better than you wrote the title, Wet Beaver.
Oh,
Um,
no, no, no. Oh, you and your titles. You and
the
your
titles,
title.
yeah.
Oh my
But
god.
yeah,
Why do I
Thirst Trap.
associate with you? My
But
goodness.
Thirst Trap was still pretty good because even though it's sort of making an allusion to this sort of popular way it's used to describe a seductive photo. I mean, I still think that Saturn in Pisces uh can represent the sort of instinct and the infrastructure that limits and regulates water, and that's going to become a much bigger deal since water is becoming more scarce,
Mm.
especially with warming climate. And so just the other day I retweeted this on Twitter. I guess in Italy, or was it Spain? I forget exactly which one it was. Let me just check. um yeah, so climate activists in Spain, they targeted several golf courses and they were plugging up holes, the golf courses, to
Oh, love it.
protest
Love it.
the amount of water that's used to maintain the golf course. And I love that because obviously that sort of gets people where it where it
Yeah.
hurts, or
Yep.
gets people's attention, who really could afford to be more concerned. So yeah, I
Like
love that.
like George Carlin said, the smaller the ball, the more arrogant the game. You know, basketball, anyone plays it in any sort of, urban courtyard, but yeah, golf, with the tiny ball, it's
Right.
yeah.
So yeah, so Saturn and Pisces, I think, is really going to be bringing this awareness of the
Yeah.
scarcity of water and the need to
Yeah.
protect it.
It reminds me of the fact that, I mean, probably, like, aside from the whole Russia-Ukraine war and everything else going on, the next big war that's likely to happen would be between Ethiopia and Sudan and Egypt, because Ethiopia, the Nile River runs from the mountains of Ethiopia. It runs, north into the delta there, in Egypt. And the Ethiopians want to build a series of dams, to cultivate agriculture, but that would cut off, the Nile waters from Sudan and Egypt, who, kind of count on that and have
Right.
counted on that water for millennia. So, yeah, and Egypt's being really so. I mean, Egypt just sorry, Ethiopia, just fought a civil war, which is not really over. It's, still sort of. I mean, it's technically over for now, but still sizzling. But on top of that, I think they're being quite obstinate and not up to negotiating the terms of this damming. So that could lead to some serious trouble up there. And that's just one of the areas I'm thinking of. Of course, something else we've talked about that's come up is, orcas attacking yachts and things like that. This is another facet to
Right.
the Saturn and Pisces thing.
Well, even the I mean, even the submersible story, I feel like is sort of about like the vengeance of
Yeah,
the ocean sort of coming back.
yeah,
Um,
big time.
One brief thing I wanted to say about civil wars in general is that, according to Paul Collier, who is this Oxford University professor, he wrote this book called Wars, Guns, and Votes. He said typically civil wars last 7 to 15 years on average, while the average for international wars is about 6 months. And the reason why civil wars tend to be much longer than international conflicts in general is because obviously it's more intractable when you have two people sort of fighting over the same land. There's no easy way to just retreat to your own um, places, as you do between two international countries. So
Sure.
civil wars tend to be much more difficult to resolve. But what I thought was so interesting about that quote is 15 years, as you know, is the base unit of Mars, right? Where
Mhm.
that's the amount of time it takes for the sun and Mars to return to the same general area of the zodiac. But 7 years, just roughly half of that, around 7.5 years, you'll get a Sun Mars conjunction that takes place generally in the same part of the zodiac where Mars had gone retrograde
Right.
7.5 years before. It's that kind of halfway interval of the 15 years. And so he says 7 to 15 years is the rough average length of time of civil wars. And then of course 6 months, that's roughly the length, because he says 6 months is the average length of international conflict, which is roughly the length of a Mars retrograde, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty
So
well. Yeah. Yeah. I
give
mean,
or
yeah.
take.
I mean, including those long, if you want to call them shadow periods.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think of a Mars
So
retrograde as a 6-month event.
yeah.
More or less.
So, yeah, I just thought that was so interesting that even from a completely non-astrological point of view, these figures still kind of keep popping up, these intervals
For
of
sure.
the planets. And of course, Mars is the planet we most associate with war, but not totally. I guess that's one thing that people might ask, especially people who followed your work with Venus and looking at
Mhm.
wars, is what's the difference between like a Mars type of war versus like a Venus type of war? Um,
Well, I mean, ultimately, I think war involves some kind of dance between the 2, you know? And, um, I mean, the Venus front is diplomacy, I think, that's where that's the part of war I'm most interested in personally. When I read a lot of books about war, there's a whole sort of ecosystem of historians who just look at the history of like battles and the formations of armies, and like, I'm sort of less inclined towards that, and I'm always interested in the people speaking behind closed doors, trying to negotiate things, and sort of the way the personalities involved in those negotiations and how that influences diplomacy. That as an astrologer, that's the thing that sort of intrigues me more. The as opposed to sort of the typical military historian stuff. Although I read some military history. So yeah, I mean the that's where Venus, has its hand most directly in war. I think is just the talking that goes on before, during, and after a war. That's just as critical as everything else.
well, I would also imagine, wars usually end once there is like political solutions seem to end wars, not always battles, right? I mean, it's usually the case that peace eventually is what is
Yeah,
achieved after the period of hostilities. So
yeah,
um
I mean, usually it's because one party just feels, wiped out, or both parties sometimes feel just like wiped out and that they can't go further. Sometimes there's things like the War of 1812, the war between, United States and Britain, um, sort of like the second part of the Revolutionary War, if you want. That war was pretty much stopped entirely by the people, by the electorate, the American people, the British people, uh, on the of their own accord, just instructed their governments, like, look, we're not really into this. You just put an end to it, and it ended in a relative stalemate. So yeah, I mean, sometimes, but that's kind of rare. Usually it's total sort of exhaustion and what have you. I mean, think, Germany and rubble and stuff, and raising the white flag, that kind of thing.
So, what do you think about the fact that Venus is going to be coming so close to making this conjunction to Mars, but it never quite reaches the conjunction? They never really complete it by
Yeah.
degree.
Yeah.
It's like an apparent, a false conjunction. It's not consummated. In the perfection of an aspect. It's like a close call, but not doesn't really quite make it there until I think February of next year is when
Right.
they
Yeah.
actually can join again.
Yeah, there have been other retrogrades like that. I think, if I remember correctly, 1964. Let me see here. I should share my screen, and we can look at this together. All right, so if we go back to 1964. Oh, no, that's not the one, is it? Because that one did catch up. Oh, mm, yeah, it did catch up at the end of the retrograde. Okay, my bad. I know I've seen it before, though.
I mean, wasn't
Um,
there one in? No, I know that. I think in. I think in 2022, like they didn't meet up until they reached the next sign or something.
mm,
But I don't know if it was the same scenario here. I mean, in theory, I would think that Venus almost reaching Mars, but not being able to fully
yeah,
complete that would say something about like a a, a real push for unification or peace, but just not being able to accomplish that, just like a very close call
right.
with being able to sort of qualm or quell things. I'm thinking especially in terms of the war in Ukraine, because the invasion started at that Venus Mars conjunction where like Mars kind of overtook you know the peace principle, Venus.
Yeah. I have to wonder if the Venus retrograde not catching up to Mars, or Venus not catching up to Mars, um, kind of reminds me of the coup that we were talking about a couple of
Right.
weeks ago. In the sense that, this thing started but didn't quite reach fruition.
Right. I don't know what the max. I don't know what date where Venus and Mars were like at their maximum closeness. That could have been in the past week or even the week before. I'm not sure exactly when
Yeah,
that started
right,
happening because
right
Venus
around that.
is. I mean, it'll be sort of official that like they're moving in different directions once Venus actually
Yeah,
stations. But I don't
yeah.
know
Although
if
even now Venus is slowing down. So if you're, again, this is why I don't just look for the station, but even leading up to the station, you've got Venus, just slowing down to a virtual stop even now. So even now, you would say it's visibly not reaching Mars.
right.
Yeah. So yeah, Venus and Mars, that partnership, one of it is sort of, agreements, like I said, Venus retrogrades often are when peace treaties or surrenders or ceasefires, things of that nature, are signed. Not that I expect one, with this Venus retrograde. I'm not expecting any ceasefires or surrenders, but when the time comes, very often those are the moments when it happens.
Well, yeah. It's I wish I could say. I mean, a few of the things I was really looking toward for like being the end of the Ukraine war, came and passed. They they were, I mean, they were significant. For example, I thought it was amazing that you had found that Jupiter Neptune conjunction in Pisces was what ended the original Crimean War.
Right.
But when that came around this time, it was like the sinking of that giant battleship of
Right.
the Russians. It was this like colossal,
Yeah.
victory for the Ukrainians, but not
It
a
was it
conclusive
was still
war-ending one.
yeah. I mean, look, the first Crimean War was lost really because the Russians were so behind in technology. The French and British, who they were fighting against, had railroads. They had. I mean, this is when Florence Nightingale starts doing, introduces nursing to the battlefield, which the Russians didn't have. Even if it largely amounted to just sawing off gangrenous legs and things like that. It was like the beginning of soldiers really being treated on the battlefield in a whole new way. Um, but yeah, Russia didn't have telegraphs, they didn't have railroads, and so they were just like, you know, decades behind the British and French. Um, and the Tsar of Russia was reading updates on the war in British and French newspapers, which is just pathetic. And I think what you got with Jupiter, Neptune, and Pisces last year, like, yeah, the sinking of the ship, it was really when the realization that, Russia just was not equipped in the way the world thought they were. The weapons they've been making are nowhere near the quality of the American weapons, which of course Ukrainians are using. And just all the logistics, all the things like the big convoy of trucks that had to be abandoned because they didn't have fuel, and then or food,
Right.
all that kind of stuff. So
Someone is asking about if Mercury conjoins Venus before she stations direct. Mercury conjoins Venus on, I believe it's July 27th. And that's after Venus is stationed retrograde. Let me
just
just make
as it's
sure that's
stationed, yeah,
correct.
that's about right. Yeah,
Yeah, so because Venus stations on July 22nd or so, and so Mercury hits Venus retrograde on July 27th.
just as it
And
hits. Yeah.
yeah, just so yeah, Mercury does conjoin Venus before Venus stations direct and after Venus is stationed retrograde. Someone's asking, Venus has been slowing down for a bit since the shadow on the 18th June. So what Astro seeking, trying to figure out speed with Venus face and interval from introduction video. I mean, it's all red. It's all red right now.
Yeah.
The time where it's maybe a little more in doubt as to whether or not you're in a period or not is if you're taking the astronomical heliacal setting and rising into account on the other side of the sun. But the more I'm looking at that, the more I'm thinking it probably still makes sense to use just a 73-day interval from the date of the superior conjunction or the exterior
Right.
conjunction,
Yeah.
because it's just too variable as to when exactly it happens. I mean, I there might still be something really, really important to that. My little program that I made that I've been sort of making maps. I've been making these maps of the way that Venus heliacally rises and sets, and I'm trying to do them for the full 8 years to see, if or what patterns sort of exist. And so far that's really, really interesting. Um, uh, because they kind of happen in different ways. And I still think that could be uh, useful or relevant,
I
but
think I think it's super useful and relevant. Look, I designed the map just to sort of identify these different periods of time. The idea of beginning and ending the red intervals with the greatest elongations instead of the 73-day rule, I mean, it only changes the red interval, the length of it, very slightly by a couple of days at the most, but it just made it for a very natural border in that sense. But yeah, if we start trying to like define the blue interval according to heliacal risings and settings, then it's gonna get really complicated really fast. So that being said, I think that's absolutely critical information to track and integrate into the blue interval and how we see the blue interval and understand that the blue interval has this variable
Squishy.
to it. Yeah, it has this
Yeah.
variable to it that is absolutely dependent on locality.
Yeah. I mean, that's really this kind of interesting that there are these parts of the cycle which are kind of more absolute, and then other things which are more variable, like the blue period being kind of um dependent on your location, as to when that happens exactly. Um so okay, we got some questions here. Mercury retrograde in Virgo, some political backstabbing perhaps. Yeah. Well, I think they might be saying that because Mercury stations retrograde pretty close to Mars
Hmm.
in Virgo, but like Venus and Mars, Mercury also almost reaches a conjunction with Mars, but then pulls back. So I'm not sure it would be as much of a political backstabbing as much as an attempted one.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I think that not unlike the way
Not unlike,
the way the
yeah,
coup played out. Sort of, someone shows their hand, but it's not quite enough to win the card game.
right.
Yeah.
Although in general, I'm a little, I guess, nervous about when Mercury finally does meet up with Mars later on in November, um, for sort of slightly different reasons. But uh, the what was I going to say about it? Oh, but as far as like the Mercury retrograde sort of happening in proximity to Mars, I would think that uh, there would be something about the fact that they appear to be conjunct, but that they don't actually complete that conjunction, which would reflect a situation where there's something which is sort of feared that maybe doesn't quite come to pass. It's a situation which sort of looks scary, but somehow doesn't manifest in the worst case scenario. It just sort of looks like it for a while. Um,
Sure.
and that's kind of how I'd interpret it in a horror context as well. It's basically a reformation, right? That's you have two planets which look like they're going to make an aspect, but it doesn't quite happen the way it sort of looks like it might. Sort of a plot twist.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is, Virgo isn't just Virgo these days. These days, Virgo has an opposition from Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, sort of bearing down on them. And I think that has some say in how any sort of transit in Virgo plays out. It's not a bubble; it's an axis. So Mercury and Mars going into Virgo are have some mitigation, have some terms involved when it comes to that Saturn transit in particular.
Yeah, I'm still pretty nervous about the Mars Saturn opposition that will be
Mhm.
happening. As I mean, really, as soon as Mars enters into Virgo, then it's actually entering into the sign based opposition. But then by July 20th, we get to that um, the exact Mars Saturn opposition, and I think around July 20th, that's also when we get the Moon conjoining. Pardon me, we get the Moon conjoining Mars in opposition to Saturn. So we really get this really highlighted Mars Saturn opposition. Anyone who's seen the Saturn and Pisces video Thirst Trap knows about my theory of how this connects to um this is the Saturn return basically of the Three Gorges Dam in China.
Right.
So the Three Gorges Dam was started at a Mars Saturn opposition with Mars and Virgo opposite Saturn and Pisces, and we're now coming around to the Mars Saturn return of the beginning of the construction of um, the dam. And this is really significant because obviously Three Gorges Dam is the largest dam in the world. It's obviously a major water infrastructure project, so it makes a lot of sense for Saturn and Pisces. But it makes me a little nervous that there would be some sort of probably a kind of tense or crisis type situation at that dam. I don't want to speculate as to how big that could be. Obviously, it would be catastrophic if anything happened to it where it actually failed. Um, but in many cases, engineers, there are some things that they can do when things are going wrong. So I guess just keep your eyes peeled on the Three Gorges Dam in the next few weeks as Mars and Saturn kind of make the return to where they were at the construction of that dam.
Oh, Elsa X says China's had really catastrophic flooding these past few weeks as well. I haven't been aware of that.
Yikes.
I didn't.
Yeah, I know that they very recently, like, I don't know exactly what they call it, but when you've built up a lot of water behind the dam, they've tried to actually let some of the excess out to make sure that they're not overwhelmed by future, flooding that will likely happen. So, um, if something does happen, I think it would be a fairly impressive call because it's like hitting a target that no one's been aiming at. Um, but if it goes by without anything, seeming to happen, then I guess it's goes on the heap of bad predictions I've made too.
I think speaking of which, one thing I haven't seen happen yet while Saturn's been in Pisces, but that I would expect to happen given the current sort of geopolitical climate. The United States no longer has destroyers patrolling the oceans of the world, protecting trade, which is really what has kept the whole sort of, international trade thing going. Without that sort of that protection, everyone's left to, defend their own exports and imports, as it were. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a dramatic uptake in piracy, basically on overseas piracy, when it comes to different governments outside the United States trying to trade with each other. There's a lot of talk about the BRICS arrangement, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And some people are really excited about that, but I just don't see how it's going to work because none of those countries really have the navy necessary to protect that kind of global trade. And no one does anymore. So yeah, there's already the breakdown of the old sort of globalized order. I mean, that is broken down, but in terms of like really seeing the consequences of that can be another, I think, outcome related to Saturn and Pisces that we haven't seen yet, but that I would expect to see.
Well, and that will be really interesting to see how that potentially develops as Neptune and Saturn move into Aries, given that Neptune Aries was like the first submarine,
Yeah.
developed first military submarine.
Yeah.
So kind of the oceans becoming another kind of battlefield again, is kind of a unfortunate prospect of that combination sort of coming into that sign.
Yeah, but a sort of Wild West battlefield like it hasn't been, in a long, long time. Yeah, that's just it. There's that whole the way the oceans are governed or the lack thereof is the new state of things.
I think that's a good call, though. I think, pirates are definitely due for a comeback. I think pirate core will become a new aesthetic that, people,
It's not Captain Jack anymore, man. It'll
pirate
have me
core.
reaching for the Captain Morgan, but it's not going to be Captain Jack.
Right. That's really interesting. I've kind of tended to see the development of BRICS and a sort of the sort of decentralized order or deglobalization as another sort of manifestation of the age of air. The fact that we are now solidly in this age of Jupiter Saturn conjunctions taking place in air signs. The main quality of air is that it's dispersed and diffuse and spread out and decentralized.
Yeah.
And we've gone from the age of Earth, which is like super concentrated, to the airy age, which is more digital and spread
Scattered.
out and more of a network than a you know particular place. So I think orders like that, will definitely make more sense than sort of strongly centralized situations. Let's see.
Yeah, global warming opening the northern passage is going to make submarines relevant again. Yeah, I mean that's
Ah,
ironically, usually Canada has just sort of ridden on American coattails in terms of defense and military. I mean, we do have a military in Canada, but obviously it's always sort of followed US wherever it goes. But when it comes to the Arctic, suddenly, yeah, Canada and Russia are looking each other in the eye in terms of who gets to make use of all this recently available ocean space, as if things weren't testy enough.
Dr. Cornell West is running for president, has a Gemini stellium and Aquarius moon. I've never looked at his chart, but
I did
having a
some
Gemini
time ago.
stellium
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, he's a talker for sure. I wish him luck. I mean, I've already said which Gemini I think is going to win, and it's not someone as who I admire the way I do Dr. West. Yeah, I mean, money is flowing out of China. China is, really kind of coming apart right now. Yeah,
Wonder-
yeah. Cornel West is running. He changed parties, right? He was going to run with the Greens I forget. He was running with one party and then he switched party, or it was the People's Party. I'm only tangentially aware of that, but I have seen it.
I
What are you
wonder what
reading
the
there?
astrological markers are for the climate emergency. Latest news says doom feedback loops will start within 15 years. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure if I know like the precise. I wouldn't say like, oh well, clearly Mars is sextile Jupiter one random time. That must be why we're having this ongoing issue with the climate. I think something that is kind of interesting about not just like the climate, but environmentalism, the movement to safeguard, protect, and advance the interests of preserving the Earth's ecosystem and its habitability for humans, and protecting the habitats of other creatures. I think what's sort of interesting about that is that it was after the moon was first reached. It was after humans had finally landed on another celestial object, other than Earth, and looked back at the planet and saw how kind of fragile it all was. And like that seems to be the time frame that's when we got things like Earth Day.
Yeah,
There is something about, I think that sometimes I've thought about like what will it mean when we've reached other planets, when we finally travel to other planets, and I'm not really sure. There's a lot of interesting astrological possibilities with that. But one of the things I've sort of thought is, what if reaching other planets, like when we actually travel to other planets, that we in some way have to contend with or deal with the lessons of that planet. So, reaching the moon is about learning how to value all the things that are lunar, biological life,
yeah.
uh, habitats, nature itself. Reaching Mars will be like about overcoming our martial instinct to dominate.
The moon landing to me seems like a kind of like astral projection by humanity, like the idea, like astral projection, like you're sleeping but you rise out of your body and you observe yourself sleeping,
Yeah,
which is sort of like what humanity did when we landed on the moon. We were actually able to sort of turn our heads and look at ourselves, look at the actual place we live in, which is not something we had never done. It was like a radical concept.
It's kind of a species wide loosing of the bond type event.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, and so I think it's interesting that that moment and that development in human history also coincides with our burgeoning awareness of our effect on the planet and our attempts to try to bring attention to this and to reverse this. I'm not saying I know exactly what's causing. I mean, I think human activities are very obviously the cause of global warming. I didn't mean to say it like that, but I mean as far as like astrologically understanding how
No, sure.
would I be able to look at a chart and say, "Oh, the Earth's warming"? Like, no,
No.
but I do think that there is an astrological way of understanding this current moment with respect to climate change, and I think it's sort of an outgrowth um of that event of seeing ourselves for the first time
Yeah. Yeah.
and and just having this renewed appreciation and understanding of the frailty, the fragility of life, and the very delicate place that we have to protect here, that we have
Yeah.
to you know nurture.
I think the Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries, because it happens right there at 0 on the world axis, well, very close to 0 on the world axis. Um, we don't have a precedent for a climate, crisis, astrologically speaking. We're on fresh territory. But to my mind, in terms of transits coming up, that's the one that signifies to me some level, some new deepening understanding of just where we stand. Like some harsh reality hits home. Could be like, some country literally ceases to exist or something of that, magnitude, and really hits home. Like we all sort of know abstractly, like, yeah, I mean, these past few weeks there've been these fires and all the sort of the smoke in the air on the eastern seaboard of the continental North America. But and that's kind of driving the point home a little. And the more we have fires and and whatnot, the more that'll happen. But I think when we get to Saturn Neptune in 25, 26, then it really is like, uh, um, the point really hits home, and probably because a whole lot of people are in, irreversible trouble right at that point. It's imminent.
Someone actually had a really good comment here. Brandon said, if the climate crisis is linked to a planet that result of carbon emissions, then wouldn't Neptune's significations in transits aspect be a climate indicator? It's dance with the outer planets, also Neptune's significations of the hydrologic cycle of the Earth. I mean, I'm not totally against that.
No.
I think certainly Neptune has a kind of connection to the use of oils and chemicals and plastic, right? I
Yeah.
mean, plastic was invented like when Uranus was opposite Neptune at the beginning of the 20th century.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, we were discovering, oil's use as a fuel following Neptune's discovery. I mean, it was whale oil before it was, petrol, but um, yeah, like in terms of using oil for energy.
The Exxon Valdez oil spill, I believe, happened at like a close to a solar eclipse conjunct Saturn and Neptune in Capricorn.
Yeah.
So you had this like terrible like spill involving oil spill. Like I think there's something
That
to be
really,
said for like
yeah.
contamination of the environment by oil and Neptune for sure.
Yeah, and that's what I'm getting at with Saturn Neptune. Like it's sort of like this wake up call. I mean, we're already in trouble, but I think like Saturn Neptune is when the frog realizes, oh, the water's boiling. Um, to use that old analogy. And yeah, when Valdez happened, I know you were just a year and a half, but I was I
Yeah.
was I was a 20-year-old, and it was really, really shocking to see, people having to scrub, ducks and what, do covered in oil, all this wildlife covered in oil, and people were, yeah. Trabrex is asking about the conjunction 2026. That's the one I'm talking about. And even in 2025, they get very, very close to conjunction. Um, But yeah, that was the Exxon Valdez crash was a huge wake up call like we had never had up until that point, and that's what I anticipate with this next Saturn Neptune, like something so bad that the world is like, okay, we're at a different level than we allowed ourselves to believe we were in.
Right. Saturn Neptune transits, they do tend to be like these really tragic times that kind of call upon our need to be like resilient in the face of like just kind of boundless sort of tragedy or suffering. There's often the loss of what you once had, and like the entire, just especially things being sort of sunk underwater or washed away. I think we, at least in the United States, I think most people would remember Hurricane Katrina. That took place at a Saturn Neptune opposition, right?
Yeah.
And that was exactly what happened. There were people whose lives were never the same after that, who moved, to some other place, and it was just this terrible tragedy.
Yeah, yeah. And yet one that, like, the whole mythos of, levees breaking and New Orleans flooding had been in the sort of the mythology for years. That was the other thing, is like it actually happened. There's a lot of great old blues songs and even a Led Zeppelin song about
When
it.
the levee
Essentially,
breaks.
yeah, like
Yeah.
about that very thing happening. But it was
Yeah.
always this sort of like this lore, like the same way we talk about, global warming, but it hasn't quite. I mean, things have been happening, fires and all that, but we're not in the same shape that I think we will be when the Saturn Neptune conjunction happens. Peggy Treg is asking, Nick, would you please list some of the books you have read about negotiations during a wartime? Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't I take you quickly through my library? Do you mind, Patrick?
Oh, no, feel free. Yeah.
Okay.
Just make
Because
sure you don't show us your porn. Just
I don't have any.
make sure you're.
What are you insinuating? I don't have any of that. I'm too busy working to enjoy myself in that kind of reckless way. Let's see. I mean, I have a lot of books. Here's a good one. Paris 1919 by my fellow Canadian citizen Margaret Macmillan. This is about the Paris Peace Conference of 1919 after the First World War, and how the world order was established. I mean, this is why Iraq has the boundaries it does, and so many countries in the world have the boundaries that they do, and just the way things were sort of divided up. I also, I have, let's see, in a Russian chapter, I have books. I mean, this is a short one just about the Russo-Japanese Treaty of Portsmouth. This was the treaty that got Theodore Roosevelt a Nobel Peace Prize, of all things. That ended the Russian-Japanese War. But most, I have a lot of books about war, and a lot of them will include the negotiations. Oh, I know a good one I could show you. This is a book I learned a lot
It's kind
about.
of hilarious that Roosevelt got the Peace Prize.
Right, I know,
Right.
because
It's
the
kind of
guy was yeah, no. Well, just because he sort of initiated and hosted the peace
just because he started a bunch of wars.
yeah, but he helped
Anyway,
he helped
sorry.
he helped he helped end one, yeah.
Yeah.
This book by Amanda Foreman, A World on Fire, this is a really great book that, if you're interested in the American Civil War, has a bunch of information that just isn't available anywhere in any of the. Well, there's one other book. What is it? The Cause of All Nations. Yeah, The Cause of All Nations. This one by Don Doyle, I think it is. These two books, although really I think the other one, World on Fire, these two books, this is an international history of the American Civil War. They really give you a sense of how the rest of the world was responding to the Civil War, and how, for instance, like the World on Fire explains how diplomacy in England between Charles Adams. Charles Adams was the son of John Quincy Adams and the grandson of John Adams, and he was Lincoln's ambassador to the court of St. James in London. And he and Russell, Lord Russell, who is the grandfather of Bertrand Russell, the famous pacifist, ironically,
Right.
the two of them just happened to get along really well. It's sort of like what I was talking about earlier, like the diplomacy side of war. Um, because Charles Adams and Lord Russell just had good chemistry, they were able to resolve a lot of the things that were happening between the US and Britain that could have easily erupted into expanding the war to include the British. The British and the French were, during the Civil War, sort of sitting by the side and seeing, which side might win, and they're trading with both. And then at one point, there was a Confederate ship sailed for England that or I think, no, it was a British ship that had Confederate diplomats on it, and the Americans boarded the ship and wanted to arrest the diplomats. It became this whole sort of crisis that almost brought Britain into the war. But with Adams and Russell, just like being able to talk things through, that managed to keep England, out of the war long enough to realize, what side they stood on. So that's a really good one. But overall, I think just generally speaking, a lot of books about wars will have good chapters about how those wars are resolved. I mean, I guess I have other ones. The Second World War involved. I've got a few books about Yalta. Yeah, more than 3 books about Yalta. I know there's some others I have on Yalta that. Yeah. Okay, that's the one I've read. I thought I had some more, and then there's also Potsdam. There's one on Potsdam. So I mean, there are. Sorry, I should give the author. So that's Michael Nieberg on Potsdam and Yalta. But my favorite book on Yalta is this one by Sergei Plokhy, who's a really important Russian historian. Sorry, am I not showing the screen? Did I forget to?
I don't see
Oh
anything
yeah,
right now.
God damn it! I went and
Sorry.
forgot it.
You were sharing a little while ago.
I was sharing, and then I forget. I keep doing this, Watson. I keep doing this. It's and actually, one of my clients the other day was making fun of me of how I keep forgetting to share the screen. So
Oh no.
I'm being mocked in consultations for this. So
Oh,
sorry, just
dear.
to get back. So this is my favorite book about the Yalta peace conference, and then Potsdam is this one. Show the cover quickly. Yeah, Michael Nyberg. Okay. All right. I'll stop sharing and stop talking about my library.
Oh, yeah, no worries. So Brandon again mentioned, he said, my captain friend mentioned the other day about sunken nuclear subs around the world, 2 specifically under the Arctic, at depths where recovery isn't exactly possible now. What happens when they deteriorate and the nuclear material leaches into the ocean? That sounds like a pretty nightmarish
Oh, Brandon.
situation, because that's terrible.
Oof.
One of the things I've been thinking about with Saturn conjunct Neptune, like in Pisces going into Aries, is, I mean, if Saturn is about like scarcity of water, and then with Neptune, the planet of sort of chemicals, it really brings up the idea of like contaminated water, and like water being scarce because it's chemically not okay. And I think that would happen in particular ways, but probably in some global way. I mean, it's Neptune. So that's a really frightening prospect. And I would think, to speak to what Megan here has said, she said, I've been worrying that the climate crisis and the financial crisis / cost of living are going to collide in utter unsustainability, worse than now.
Well, yeah. Look, that's the thing
Real
about
talk, yeah.
yeah. The
You
thing
know,
about deglobalization is a bunch of countries have industrialized in the last 50 years, and they've done it so quickly. And now with the US no longer sort of protecting global trade, a lot of them are going to be, stuck with a lot less than they're used to having. This is the thing, is everyone's had a taste now. Oh, you enjoy cell phones? Well, guess what? You might not. have them unless you live close to, where they're manufactured now. And yeah, Apple's finally pulling their manufacturing out of China. They were one of the last holdouts, but I think they are finally sort of seeing the Peter Zeihan thinks we're going to go out without Apple products for a little while because it's going to take them time to reestablish a manufacturing base in probably Mexico or Vietnam or something. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of spots in the world that, okay, going without cell phones, we did that for, thousands of years before. But I think people will miss them, and if they're living in places where they used to have access to them. And there's certain foods that just aren't going to be as widely available as they should be. And that can lead to problems as well. That was the thing, is the global order allowed everyone to sort of share in the booty to some extent. There was still a lot of problems with it, and it wasn't exactly entirely equitable, but overall, people in the world had access to more than they ever could have. There was more sort of more equality in terms of access to goods than the world has ever seen, and that's over. And sort of people are going to have to get used to some new normal. And I
Yeah.
think that when the Saturn Neptune hits, that's when that Saturn Neptune is reckoning. That Saturn Neptune is people really getting clarity in terms of where they are. Like I said, it's when the frog realizes the water's boiling.
Yeah. So there's a lot of really good comments here.
Yeah.
They've been dumping nuclear material directly into the ocean for a while, like decades, plus the water from Fukushima. I mean,
Yep.
yeah, I mean, I guess I shouldn't be saying like this is like I shouldn't be highlighting Saturn Neptune as like a water contamination event, like the water hasn't been contaminated this whole time. But I would think that it is.
It's like I said, the clarity, like everyone realizing just how messed up. It's not the fact that, yeah, it has been going on for a long time, but
Right.
the Saturn Neptune is like, oh, things are that messed up.
Yeah.
Oh,
And I also see someone said, I think seafood will skyrocket in price. So better enjoy your favorite seafood restaurant sooner rather than later. I think one of the big things that I'm sort of expecting from Neptune and Taurus is the uh, a more sophisticated sort of synthetic food, right? Because one of the things we've seen with Uranus and Taurus has been being able to print out meat, being able to just clone meat in a petri dish and being able to have meat that never came from a real animal. And when the pandemic hit with Uranus and Taurus, we saw everyone get back into like making their own bread and making their
yep.
making their own pastry. Uranus and Taurus is the era of is it cake? Of these like hyper. We had all these like kind of crazy innovations sort of surrounding food. We this whole idea of like making everything sort of like fine dining is really really reached a kind of crazy mania with Uranus and Taurus. And I say this because usually when you have a successive transit of one planet through a sign, you kind of see that topic get revisited in some way when another planet transits through that same sign. So if Uranus and Taurus has kind of brought about these like revolutions regarding food and the way we make it, then I would think Neptune would sort of bring this like more synthetic version of this. Another thing that's sort of come out with Uranus and Taurus has been like 3D printing. So I think I'm sort of putting this together and I'm thinking about how the climate is getting too warm for things like peanuts, coffee, chocolate. Those are going to be major. I mean, I don't even want to think about a world where chocolate, is,
Coffee.
is
Are
the
you
gold.
kidding me?
Yeah, like no,
Coffee?
that's serious stuff. I mean, we'd have to obviously. There'll be a lot of agriculture which could move northward or southward depending on where it is in the world, but
But across oceans,
yeah,
less.
and
Yeah.
I've talked about this before on Twitter, but I thought it was really interesting that coffee was first introduced to Europe when Neptune entered into Taurus back in some distant Neptune Taurus period, and same thing with chocolate. Like chocolate came to Europe when Neptune arrived in Taurus. Last time Neptune was in Taurus, we got Coke. The first Coca-Cola was formed.
Coca-Cola, yeah.
So we have these.
During a Venus
Oh,
retrograde, I
really?
think.
So we have these three substances during Neptune and Taurus periods that kind of take the world by storm. These brown addictive substances. And so I imagine that when Neptune comes back into Taurus after its 14-year stay in Aries, and this is quite a ways from now, but I would anticipate that there's like sort of like synthetic versions of the foods that we
Yeah.
can no longer grow.
Yeah.
Um,
And
because of
meat that never was alive.
meat that was never alive and food that never existed. Food that is kind of somehow chemically reconstituted. I'm thinking that might almost be like when we have a Star Trek style
Right, like beep beep beep, and a tray comes out.
yeah, and you just Earl Grey tea, hot, and it comes
Yeah,
out.
right.
Something kind of like that, like a
Laser
beep,
printed food.
because right now you can, ask Chat GPT to like make you a poem, but 30 years from now, you'll be able to like beam a thought to your fridge and it will produce an apple, um, something like that. So I think that's kind of the future of food in a way, is that it might be reduced to its, individual sort of chemical
Mm,
components,
mm,
and that will be how food is produced, just because the costs and because of the degraded state of the natural world will preclude, the ability to have things which grow naturally, which is, a great tragedy.
mm.
But also maybe a way that we cope.
Yeah. I'm reminded that the introduction of coffee to Europe, and that happened with the Ottoman siege of Vienna, wasn't it? The Ottomans besieged Vienna. Vienna fought off the invaders, and when the Ottomans left, they left behind their coffee pots with this really interesting brown liquid in it, and Vienna was like, "Oh, this goes great with pastries," and a culture was born. Um, so yeah, maybe we, look, if we're going to get another Islamic invasion, I hope they have something tasty like that to drop off with them.
So,
Willy Wonka chewing gum meals becoming a reality. Yeah, that's basically it.
yeah, no, that's a good analogy. Um, I think um, we're treating this topic very almost sort of calmly for
Well,
this
what are we?
how
Are we
severe
supposed
it
to
is.
scream? Are we supposed to panic?
Yeah, I mean,
I
am I
mean, I
supposed
guess we
to
are supposed to panic,
scream?
but
You know, but I think there are people watching this who, and a couple of comments just sort of voice this, which is this feeling of great fear about this. What should you realistically do? If this is the set of facts before you, and um, I think that I don't pretend to have all the answers or anything, but I would think it would probably be a good idea if you can, or if you don't have the means right now, to do everything in your power to try to get the means to move north, or to move to a place that has cooler temperatures, um, and or as far north as you can, and to think about, when you move, to move to a place that will have abundant water supplies, and that has sort of space for agriculture, for land to be able to grow things. Or if you don't have that, kind of money or means, I perfectly understand. I mean, they have like little hydroponic sets that you can get from Amazon or other places, where you can grow things in your house. From personal experience, I would also advise getting a fan to go with it, because it's hard to stop mold from growing on those setups. But some people have really great success with those, and it's you can obviously grow them indoors, which is good if you don't have space. I don't, this can't become like a prepper channel or something. Um, you know, but I don't have like all of the solutions. But if you, I don't want to like lead anyone down like the prepper road, because I feel like there's a lot of
This live
scary like
stream is
right
a
wing
couple
stuff.
episodes away from becoming Duck
There's a
Dynasty.
lot of like scary right wing stuff, and I don't think like it's unfortunate that like prepping has sort of been co-opted by that cohort, but I think there's still some useful things that people can get from people who have done a lot of thinking about how to survive when you can't, when certain things aren't a given. And so, for example, with water, one potential way of getting water if you are in a place where like your water sources become contaminated would be to get a dehumidifier, which traps the air from the which traps the water from the air, and you could get like a heavy metals testing kit. If you have like an osmosis purifier, then you could use reverse osmosis to filter your water so that it's potable, so that it's safe to drink. You should probably do the same with rainwater because it also has a lot of pollutants in it. Um, it's sad, but sure, water or snow can even be contaminated. So it's there's any number of things you're going to have to do, a lot more probably if you're in sort of reading on that to sort of have a more comprehensive solution to that. But I think it makes a lot of sense to be thinking about some of those things and, to be saving up for it if you can. I realize I'm saying that from like a place of privilege. Like, I don't want to just like come off like I'm saying like, oh, just buy the things that are impossible for you to buy right now. But
Come on,
I-
peasants,
but
get with it.
but I
Snap,
also don't.
snap.
But I also don't know what else to say. In light of just how towering and awful, these scenarios are that are basically certain. Astrology or not. Uh, I think the human side of me, just wants to, give everyone kind of some sort of, I don't know, a leg up on all this or something. But maybe I don't know.
In 2017, South Africa went through a really bad drought, and yeah, it was pretty intense. The water reservoir was down to like 10%, 10% full. It was really getting dicey there, and literally everyone in South Africa got rain tanks, and started, and now they're common. You see them in every house. Because it was the only way to keep things going. Even if pollutants be damned, when you need water, you drink whatever sort of comes. And yeah, I mean, it's that was something that really sort of we came very, very close to total collapse that year. So in that sense, I feel like I've had a preview of where things could go, and how bad they could get. But yeah, I think you're right about filtering the water and how necessary that is.
I would also say to probably get away from coasts and to try to aim for places that are higher in altitude, because then you're not going to be as prone to flooding. And yeah, I mean, it's a bit grim, isn't it? But
We've kind of veered off the astrology here.
yeah, but I think these are all the things that the astrology makes me think of.
Yeah,
I mean, the astrology is reinforcing sort of the scenario as we see it. A lot of great comments here. I'm not sure I can read through all of them. And there's people like on different platforms. I think this is probably the only place where we can actually see what everyone is saying from everywhere else. But I would say if you're stuck in a place, if you are, if you actually are confined to a place that is hotter, then I would say definitely investing in a machine that can take water from the air, some sort of dehumidifier, especially one that can automatically produce it into potable water, like meaning able to be drunk. Then I'd recommend that, but obviously that's
yeah.
going to be some amount of money.
I've heard of some cost-effective technology that's been designed to collect water, even in the desert. There was it's been a few years. Like, this was back when we had the drought. I was looking into this, and There is technology available where even in the desert you can set up this apparatus that isn't too expensive to build, and it gathers and collects moisture, and can result in providing drinking water for a set of people. So yeah, there is technology involved. I trust that human ingenuity can maneuver around a lot of problems, but that doesn't mean that we won't be sort of facing the problems themselves, and some of us will be succumbing to the consequences, and then the survivors will have to figure out a way to carry on with the new normal.
Right. I would also say, to whatever extent you can, get on solar, because that's also another way that you can be less dependent on central energy grids. And yeah, I'm just reading all these comments. Which are
Yeah,
like,
the comment that
yeah,
people,
like you're
we
good.
we really stimulated the conversation there.
Now,
Dune still suits. Yes, yes, the Dune suits. We're
yeah,
gonna be a world of pee drinkers. That's us.
well, you're in luck. Uh, if you have a still suit. The problem with everyone having water tanks is that they spread desertification. They're not allowed in Washington State. You'll be killing off all the nearby wildlife. I mean, maybe.
Yeah, maybe in Washington State, which is still sort of rainforesty, but no, I mean South Africa is where we were. It's like desert sand. The water tanks, I think, were collecting water that baboons were drinking, and other wildlife was drinking. So I mean, I think in South Africa's case, I don't think it was killing off
All of
wildlife. I think it was sustaining wildlife.
all of these things that I think we've mentioned so far, these are all like coping strategies, in the event that nothing else changes. I mean, because I've seen a few people say like, we need like revolution, and I'm not saying like we shouldn't do that.
Look,
We absolutely should demand from our governments that they figure this out and make sure to protect everyone from this kind of devastation. And we could do it if we were willing to allocate our resources sensibly instead of giving tax breaks to billionaires, etc. But short of that, there's still many things you can do to become more independent and more resilient against these kind of dire scenarios.
yeah, so many comments here.
Yeah.
I've lost track of what I can answer.
Yeah.
And what not.
Now I guess to bring this sort of back to astrology.
Oh yeah, that's what this show's about.
Well, I mean, it comes from the astrology though. I think this is definitely going to be part of like the Saturn Saturn and Pisces, or sorry, Saturn and Neptune are already co-present in Pisces, but now that they're still moving towards that conjunction. Actually, there's kind of an interesting. It's not really reformation, but I've been trying to figure out what the significance is of the fact that for the vast majority of the time that Saturn and Neptune are moving towards each other, they're in Pisces. They're kind of in an apparent conjunction, but that they don't actually meet until they both have crossed over into Aries.
Yeah,
it's almost like right up until the finish line. They look like they're gonna really conjoin in Pisces, but they don't really perfect until Aries. And
they come very, very close though.
Yeah, they come so close. So does it still have the same weight as it does when it conjoins in Aries?
I think it does. It's true. Like if they come close, but they don't, the faster one doesn't overtake the slower one, then that is just shy of perfection. But at the same time, if the two of them are there visibly in the sky next to each other, that's not nothing. You know what I mean?
It's not nothing.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I guess there's different ways of looking at aspects, I guess, right? There's kind of the wave view where you're looking at the entire process of the transit, the application, the perfection, the separation. But then there's also like the more like particle type view where you are kind of looking at it more, looking for that sort of distinct moment of the aspect itself. And I think both are
Yeah.
relevant.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is an important point. This is also sort of analogous to what's come up with regard to Venus,
Right.
um, um, because my Venus map tracks the whole cycle, whereas like Ariel Gutman's book just talks about the conjunctions, like, as if they're lunations, whereas I'm talking about the whole cycle, like it's, the whole lunar cycle, except in this case, it's the whole Venus cycle. And those are the two, and they're as astrologers, like taking this back to lunar cycles, the new moon and full moon are important points in the lunar cycle. And we register them as these sort of, beginnings and culminatings and what have you. But it's still the whole lunar cycle, the whole 27-day thing is ultimately the thing we're examining. And just because we can isolate these peak points in the cycle, it doesn't mean we want to take our eyes off the entire cycle and be aware of the continuous ongoing process and all the points in between the peaks and valleys of the cycle. So that's how that's how I feel about Venus. I think that's intuitively, how we understand the moon, but still there's the new moons and full moons and the Venus interior and exterior conjunctions. These are all still sort of critical points within that broader picture.
The lunar synodic cycle is 29 days, not 27.
Oh, yeah.
But I realized you were talking about the
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah.
The moon itself, right?
The moon itself, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Smarty pants.
According to my calculation, I've never had a retainer, so sorry to
Okay.
everyone. So what do you think about, what do you think, like within a red period? So we're talking about the period of time where Venus is
interval. We call them intervals.
Pardon me. The interval where Venus is closer to Earth than usual, which is between the two maximum elongations. The red interval, do you feel like there's a difference between when Venus is visible versus when it's not within the red interval? Like, what do you think heliacal risings and heliacal settings mean compared to, say, like the exact conjunction of the Sun and Venus in the middle of the retrograde?
Broadly speaking, it's really still nebulous to me. But the one piece of textual reference we have for this is the idea that when a planet is under the beams, its significations are absorbed by the sun, except for when it's a time lord, and then it takes back its significations and it sort of shines. So when you see, say, like if Venus is under the beams in a chart, you're still looking, but let's say it's a really well-placed and well-aspected Venus, but it's under the beams. Those moments when Venus takes over as a time lord, let's say it's the lord of the year and annual perfections, that kind of thing, then it's sort of, that planet comes alive as though it weren't under the beams. So in horoscopic astrology, there is a means to deal with that. But like everyone else using horoscopic astrology, we're reading from these old books written in a dead language that none of us actually speak as a first language, and we're recreating the horoscopic system from these fragments of texts that have come down to us, and that we know are incomplete, and no one should forget that they are incomplete. Right. But that's, I'm using the same reference that everyone else has.
Sure.
But to the degree that I've investigated it, that really does seem to hold. I mean, I want to do more research on that point alone. But that's where I can really see a distinction. And obviously, like, horoscopic astrology is meant to do just that, to give us a framework whereby we can sort of track the ongoing exchange between planets and how one planet dominates for some period of time and then another dominates at a different period of time. So yeah, that was the doctrine according to planets being under the beams, is that they take back their significations when they're time lords. And so you'll have something that's sort of obscured by the sun until it gets its moment to shine, no pun intended.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting because I'm thinking of like the text like Rhetorius the Egyptian, where he and it's not just him. I mean, it's in a bunch of other texts too that they'll say, for example, when Venus is obscured by the sun, that it might show someone who gets married in secret. That there's kind of that the visibility factor of Venus factors into how it's shown in the life. That it's either in some way public or visible or private and invisible.
Mm.
Um, I I think I'm curious what you make of that in your work with Venus.
Yeah, I see too many instances of the planet having, life in it, even though it's under the beams. I see too many instances where the planet still seems to do its thing, even if it's under the beams, especially if it's in its rulership, especially if it's got some
So in its
power in
chariot,
it. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
um, yeah, like Mars and Scorpio under the beams of the sun, still seems to be quite potently Mars and Scorpio, which takes me back to, so like in that instance, let's say, you have the sun and Mars in Scorpio, Mars is under the beams. So the sun takes up that Mars in Scorpio and the sun uses that Mars. And, but what you have is this sort of
I'd
merging
say
of
the
the two.
sun becomes more Mars-like.
Yeah, the sun becomes more Mars and Scorpio like. But then, there will be instances when Mars takes over as a time lord, and that Mars will really sort of come alive in those instances in its own accord.
Right.
But yeah, I see too many planets under the beams. They still seem to like do their thing, especially if they're well situated,
Yeah. One thing I thought was kind of interesting, and I tweeted about this a long time ago, is that NASA announced that they could not be in contact with the rover Perseverance that was on Mars because Mars was going behind the sun. So there was like radio silence during the time that Mars was within a certain range. I'll actually see if I can find the tweet real quick because I thought it was kind of funny at the time because NASA was basically telling us that what that orb was. Let's see. What's an astro? So yeah, this was back in November of 2021. I said, just learned that the Perseverance rover on Mars took a break from October 2nd through October 19th due to the Sun-Mars conjunction. I guess this is confirmation from NASA that they use a 3-degree orb for combustion and consider it to be a malefic condition. Which, yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting.
I bet they're all over the astrology over
yeah,
it now, so,
comes out to about 3 degrees for combustion. According to NASA, that's when they couldn't actually get a message to Mars because of the sun.
That is interesting. Yeah, the high-tech astrologers of a century from now will have that kind of technology and then some. And
Right.
they'll laugh at the day. Oh, Patrick Watson had to make his own map of heliacal risings and settings.
Right.
Oh, those primitives.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that is kind of interesting though to think that if there was like a colony on Mars and you wanted to send a message, that you would actually have to take into account its relationship to the sun, because
Right.
that would affect. So I mean, it's really weird because astronomers are some of the only other people, or scientists at NASA who plan space missions, are the only other people who have to take into account the position of the planets to do something.
Oh, yeah.
They're the only other people who are doing electional astrology, because they
somewhere on this shelf behind me, or actually no, I think the book is in South Africa, but I have this book on Venus, And I mean, it's a total science book about
Mhm.
Venus. It's not an astrology book at all. But there's a date of there's a chronology list of all the rovers and, well, whatever, spacecraft that they've sent to Venus to examine it. And of course, they were all launched during Venus retrogrades, because that's when Venus is closer. So you look at the timeline, you don't need to be like the human ephemeris to go, oh yeah, that's the Scorpio
That's
retrograde, that's the Gemini retrograde.
yeah.
So of course they do. I mean, it makes sense if you're going to send a vessel out to Venus, that you do it when it's closest to Earth. So
Right, and yeah, so all the Mars launches take place at the same Sun-Mars angle as well, so that it ends up working out so that it's the least amount of distance that
yeah,
the rocket has to travel to get there. So it usually gets there by the time of the opposition when Mars is closest to the Earth.
right.
So it's yeah, it's really interesting, and it can kind of get really literal because I always thought it was my mind was kind of blown apart when I found out that the New Horizons mission, the one where we got those like ultra high def photos of Pluto, that we actually used for the first time, I guess, we used Jupiter as a slingshot to be
That
able to get to Pluto.
that was done back with Voyager.
Oh, okay.
No, that's something that they figured out with Voyager. They launched Voyager was launched actually in 77. It's another one. When I was talking about Chiron a few weeks ago, I forgot to mention Voyager, which actually disappointed me because it was an important part of. Do you remember? Didn't I go through a whole Chiron, or was that in my solo
Yeah, I
stream?
believe so. Maybe that was a while ago.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, 77, the two Voyager missions were launched, which is why the subject of the first Star Trek movie, which came out in 79, had to do with the lost Voyager mission. Um, if you see
Interesting.
that. But the Voyager would, like, initially Voyager was just meant to study Jupiter and Saturn, but while after the launch, the NASA engineers realized that they could use, yeah, the gravitational trajectory of Jupiter and Saturn to launch the satellites further out. So that goes back to the late 70s, early 80s.
Oh, I was talking more specifically about using Jupiter to get to Pluto, which was
Yeah,
first laid out by this. So yeah, there's something really, really interesting, cool about that I wanted to get to. I was just going to say that because they used Jupiter in order to get to Pluto, that meant that they had to plan the visitation of Pluto by aligning with the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction that occurred in 2007. And
right.
so they used a Jupiter Pluto conjunction to get to Pluto to be able to take these photos of it. So what's crazy about that is um the the Jupiter Pluto conjunction prior to 2007 in 1994, that was when the paper was published that first detailed how to use Jupiter's orbit to get to Pluto, a Jupiter to Pluto type mission. And that guy ended up being part of the team advising NASA on the New Horizons launch. So then if you look back at like previous Jupiter Pluto conjunctions, so like, you know, Pluto itself was discovered in a time when Jupiter was moving into a conjunction with Pluto. The little girl who named Pluto was born during a year of a Jupiter Pluto conjunction. The observatory where Pluto was first sighted opened at a Jupiter Pluto conjunction. Um, the Hubble Space Telescope, was launched during a Jupiter Pluto conjunction, and when they corrected the lenses on the Hubble telescope, so that it could first produce clear images, Jupiter was conjunct Pluto. So we seem to have this theme of Jupiter, Pluto, and like telescopes and seeing further, seeing a more distant horizon. But then at the same time, you also have advances in microscopy. And one of the predictions I made in 2020 was that we would have a new advance in microscopy in 2020. And there was some crazy new microscope that allowed us to get even more granular pictures that came out in 2020 during the course of that Jupiter Pluto conjunction, which was right in
Mm.
line with Leeuwenhoek, who was born with Jupiter Pluto. He's the guy who first basically discovered microscopic life. Um, and so it's like extremes of
Yeah,
extreme small and extremely distant things
yeah,
that we kind of get to see when Jupiter is empowered by Pluto. But
yeah.
I thought that
I
was so literal, crazy.
It is, it is. I just wanted to show you because this thing, the whole thing about using Jupiter to get planets
Hmm.
further out. Um, these are charts I made ages ago, but you can see Voyager 2 is launched August of 77. For some reason, Voyager 1 is launched a little after September 5th, 77. So the Voyagers reach Jupiter in 79. And then they get out to Saturn in 80 and 81, by which point you do have this Jupiter, Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto. And this is when it's in this period in 79, 80 that the engineers realized they can keep going. They didn't mean to go to Uranus and
Right.
Neptune. And I think they lost touch with them by the time they reached Pluto. But like the thing was they just kept going and going.
Oh, I thought that we're still in contact with them. I thought they'd like already gone past like
Are we
the
still in touch
heli
with it?
they
Okay,
they've actually
maybe I
officially
just didn't look
left
at you. The solar
the solar
system.
system. Yeah, they're
Yeah,
like
yeah, no, you're right. You're right. That's it's coming back to me. It's been so long since I looked at this. I made these I made these charts that I'm looking at right now. I made these in Cumberland back when you were a teenager and we were talking then. That's when I made these charts. So I'm not as fresh on the story as I once was. But yeah, you can see. And then by the time Voyager 2 reaches Neptune in 89, Saturn's now with Neptune. So it
wow.
was sort of, yeah. So yeah, that's that idea of using the trajectory of one planet, the gravitational trajectory of one planet, and using it to sort of spur the vessel onward.
Hmm.
That was devised sort of on the fly. Um, by
Wow.
not after Voyager was in the air, they realized they
So
could
that's
just
so
do
just
some math, and tweak some things and make it go further and further.
that's so incredible that that was when we that it just so happened that Jupiter's sort of taking that tour of those planets, and that's also when we kind of get this new knowledge about these planets themselves, and we get these like
Yeah,
new photos and
yeah.
all this new information about them.
Well, that was
And
just it because Jupiter and Saturn were heading that way anyway. It was like, oh, we can use those planets to send these things out further. And when you think of the alignments of the 80s, when you have Jupiter and Saturn in Virgo going into Libra to make their conjunction in Libra, Uranus going from Scorpio to Sag, Neptune going from Sag to Capricorn, Pluto going from Libra to Pluto. So in other words, the three outer planets following the Jupiter Saturn. And so as the two missions are coming by, they can just go further and further and further thanks to that the fact of where Jupiter and Saturn were.
it actually just occurs to me that the closest approach of the New Horizons spacecraft to Pluto was July 14th, 2015.
Oh,
Again, bringing us back to 8 years ago. At the time, I remember thinking how weird it was that we were kind of seeing like Pluto in high def. It's like what kind of
yeah. The Lord
what's
of
the
the
meaning of
Underworld,
this?
my ass. Yeah,
Lord of the yeah, Lord of the Underworld, in high definition. Like who else is
with
on
some kind
TV at
of
that
blood
time?
stain on it. Blood stain.
And because at that same time in July of 2015, there was this person who kind of emerged as a sort of, I guess you could say, a Plutonian figure in his own right.
Yeah, big ball.
That
Well, more,
guy.
yeah, sort of a Jupiterian figure, a big ball of gas.
Yeah, that guy.
Dumb as a
Um,
rock. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um,
uh, so I just thought there was something kind of appropriate that about that, especially as we were like heading into kind of Pluto return territory for the United States, that we actually kind of get this like really good look at Pluto.
we
Um
almost managed to get through this episode
I know.
with Frank Trump. We almost did it.
We almost did it.
We almost did it.
Yeah,
Okay.
almost. But
Yeah.
Let's see. Someone said a little girl named Pluto. Yeah, what's her name? The girl who named Pluto. They I think they did like some like contest at the time in the 1930s to like name the planet, and like Venetia Burney Fair, spelled Phair. She was 11 years old, probably close to a Jupiter return. And she was the one who submitted Pluto as the name for the planet. She was the one who had stuck for it. And she was born close to a
Persephone,
Jupiter Pluto.
Persephone embodied in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, that was the story behind a little bit of the story behind that. Someone said, how about Pluto squaring the nodes? Now, I wonder what you think about this, Nick, because something I've kind of been going back and forth on is whether it makes sense to look at a planet's relationship to the lunar nodes if it's not the sun or the moon, because
Yeah.
the lunar nodes, the nodes belong to the moon,
Yeah.
and to some degree the sun. It's the intersection of those points and paths. Um, so I know in theory, and I know from the astrological tradition that like generally the north node expands or magnifies and the south node decreases or diminishes. But should it really do that for anything other than the moon? Because the other planets have their own nodes with the
The other
sun.
planets have their own nodes, and theoretically, you're on very sound ground. But I find, as you know, when wearing my other hat as a horoscopic interpretive astrologer, which is not,
Mhm.
it's not as much the hat I wear in this, in the mundane work I do, or only occasionally in the over the course of conversation in this live stream. But as someone who reads nativities, planets aspecting to the lunar nodes tends to be a really big deal. It tends to tell you a whole lot about the person and their relationship to the world. So by extension, I'm tempted to say, you can extend that to the mundane facet of astrology. That being said, uh, um, you know, um, so yeah, like I mean, the moon's nodes still have something to do with the masses, with the people. I sometimes tell people that the lunar nodes represent like every other human being who isn't you, who isn't the subject of the nativity in a way. So planets aspecting the nodes will tell you, you'll see everything from like people who have tremendous biases, people who are like intensely patriotic or intensely, unpatriotic, or like people who are really community minded, versus the grouchy old man who tells you to get off his lawn. These are all sort of like very often reflect planetary relationships to the lunar nodes, a person's relationship to humanity, to the masses. And it can be like, your relationship to humanity at large, or it can be just with your neighbors and your family, or it can be to your hometown or your home country. But somewhere you'll see come out of a nativity, any kind of planetary aspect to the lunar nodes will reflect some facet of that dynamic and that relationship between an individual and everyone else, as it were.
Hmm. And do you primarily just consider the conjunctions, oppositions, squares?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the squares are important. The squares to the nodes, they speak. They speak.
Well, I mean, especially for the moon, I think it's important to look at when the moon is like square the nodes, because that's telling you if it's at its maximum point above the sun's path or its maximum low point below the sun's path. And I think that this is how I've sort of begun to understand the new moons and full moons that occur kind of midway between eclipses.
Mhm.
Because I've just noticed so many times that you kind of get these intervening narrative developments for things that happened at eclipses, often at those midpoints between the eclipses where like the sun is square the nodes roughly.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so it makes sense because if you have, a south node solar eclipse, say, then that's always going to be followed by a new moon, which is at its maximum southern point, as well as within 2 weeks of that, a full moon, which is at its maximum latitude north. So you get uh, a max south new moon followed by or preceded by a max north full moon. And it's conversely, you get the opposite, on the other end. So
Mhm.
sometimes you'll get like a max north new moon, but a max south full moon. And so I think that's why I've kind of come to this, I don't know, point of sort of questioning, like, should you or can you really use other planets with the moon's nodes? And I guess the only way I've sort of been able to rationalize it or justify it is, in theory, you should be able to do the same thing with the other planets' nodes, right? I mean, if a planet crosses the north node of Uranus, say in Gemini, then it might partake to some degree of some of that quality. It's sort of crossing that point that is relevant to that planet. Now, it's not something I'd actually talk about when I'm going over a transit with someone, but it's something that I might just sort of take note of as a planet goes over those planetary nodes. I think it's especially relevant though for the moon when it's going, over its nodes or its square its nodes, and especially when it's obviously in a configuration with the sun, because you're either going to get an eclipse or a one of these like max south or max north kind of lunar events. But the thing that I'm still trying to figure out on a kind of mundane level as well as an interpretive level is what the real difference is, like what latitude really means, because we know what longitude means. We have a pretty good idea of
Sure.
longitude. We understand longitude in terms of aspects. We understand longitude in terms of signs. Like we have really, that's like the version of astrology that we really know. But that other dimension, the vertical dimension of like how far above or below a given planet is from another one or from the sun, I feel like that's something that's been a little more threadbare. We haven't developed the same or yeah, the same amount of language even to really sort of describe those kinds of relationships or those sorts of events. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that. If you have a feeling about what latitude means, what does it mean for, say, a planet to be out of bounds in declination or at its maximum point north in latitude versus south? I have some ideas. I'm just curious if that's
Yeah.
something you thought about before.
Yeah. I mean, I've looked at out of bounds planets a lot, and where you really see them sort of show themselves isn't necessarily, I mean, I'm sure in the nativity, sometimes you pull up a chart and it's got an out of bounds moon and the person is kind of nutty and you're like, but more practically, in secondary progression, when you see planets go out of bounds by secondary progression, boy, does that sort of show itself in a big way.
Hmm.
When you can actually track the movement as opposed to just sort of freeze framing an out of bounds planet in the nativity. Um, yeah, one of the most striking things I found looking at my own life. I wasn't born with an out of bounds moon, but my progressed moon goes out of bounds over the course of my life. It goes in and out, and those periods where it's out, it's like, oh yeah, like I know what
Um,
that means. My life was, my life has gone from periods of stability to instability, really being out in the wilderness. And that's what the progress, it's like clockwork, literally, when my progressed moon goes out of bounds, there's a real difference in my life quality compared to those periods when it is in bounds.
One of the examples of Mars being out of bounds that I've always thought was kind of funny. Um, Apparently, wait, let me just make sure I got this right. I think it is before I embarrass myself. Oh, so it looks like, yeah. So March 26th, 1986 through October 7th, 1986. Mars was out of bounds, and almost at the top point of that, Usain Bolt was born.
Oh yeah.
Fastest guy alive.
Right.
Yeah.
That was Mars
Um,
going retrograde in Capricorn. That was the rare Mars retrograde in Capricorn of
so
1986. June of
so
86.
not
Yeah.
only retrograde, not only the rarest retrograde, but then also near its maximum, sort of out of bounds, and you have this guy who like just
Sure. Yeah. Well, that was also
can
Chernobyl.
outrun.
That was Chernobyl. Was
Oh, right.
April of 86. But yeah, Lady Gaga. I think she March 26, 1986.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So there you go. She's Mars out of bounds. Someone asks her if she's a hermaphrodite, and she says, "Why would it matter if I was?"
That's a great answer.
Isn't it a great answer? Yeah. She's March 28th, 86. But yeah, there you go. But yeah, Chernobyl. Think about that.
Right.
And that was Mars going out of bounds with Neptune. Conjunct Neptune.
Yeah, I think. Let's see what was. Oh yeah, so yeah, Mars was out of bounds too during 9/11. I think it was southern. That was a southern out of bounds.
9/11, yeah, that would make sense because again, it was going into Capricorn. It was in
Right,
pretty much the same. It was the same zodiacal place that
Yeah.
Lady Gaga's Mars is at.
It was right, because it was right after the Sagittarius retrograde of the summer of 2001. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the only thoughts I sort of have about latitude in terms of what it means is I think it's almost like volume, like it's like turning the volume up, or there's sort of those extremes of sort of differences
It's
in
funny
amplitude.
when you said volume, I thought of the other like measurement volume.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
But then again, it might be sort of a combination of the two, or
I don't know. Well, because I've sometimes tried to think about like how music correlates to astrology, and oftentimes people like to draw connections between like the consonant and dissonant aspects between planets as being equivalent to like consonance and dissonance in harmony. But really, music is sound over time, right? So longitude is time, because it's that's like the vertical dimension. Sorry, that's the horizontal dimension in music, and the horizontal dimension with planets is longitude. Whereas how high or low a planet is above the sun or above the celestial equator that's more like pitch.
Yeah.
So aspects between like two intervals of time, like that's more like those are more like beats. Those are time-based relationships, which is like rhythms.
I hear you.
As opposed to latitude, which is like pitch, which tells you like how high it is or how low it is. And so, sometimes I've thought about like making some kind of like app or something that could take like the transiting planets and convert it into I mean, it would sound a bit strange because most music isn't easily divisible, but into like a 360 beat framework, right? Sexagesimal. So
tell that to the universe.
Most music that we understand, at least here in like I guess the West, is we kind of understand 3 and 4, and that's about it. If you do anything other than that, you're experimental, right? If you do anything in 5 or 7,
5 and 7 can work. 5 and 7 can work.
Yeah, I like 5 and 7.
I mean, Pink Floyd's Money, that's in 7, isn't it? That's a huge hit.
Yeah, there's a bunch of well, yeah, there's Dave Brubeck, right?
Yeah, that's take 5.
Yeah,
but that whole album is different time signatures.
Right. Radiohead has a bunch of songs in 5. I think like 15 Step is in 5, and
I like 5.
I like 5. 5's great. Well,
5 can swing. 5 can swing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on where you put the division of the beat, whether you're making it 1 + 4 or 2 + 3, 3 + 2, 4 + 1.
And then you get Tool, my friend, and Tool and what they do with time signatures is like, 1 bar of 13 and then 4 bars of 12 and then a bar of 7 and
Yeah,
that's a whole other yeah. Well, Zappa is also someone who worked in a lot of different time signatures. He's got some great,
Let's see.
very
So we
innovative.
got a good comment here. As I was simply listening, this comes across as two male egos enjoying their voices, masturbating a nonsensical word salad. Well, I think we better give her
Okay.
a
All right.
job
Thank
writing
you.
slogans for the show.
Yeah.
Two male egos enjoying their voices, masturbating nonsensical word salad. But you certainly don't have to listen to us. We're
Nope.
here to talk about astrology and the things that come
Sometimes
out of
we
that.
veer off. Yeah. All right. Lori Sue Craig and Clamped.
But if you
If
have
that
a
is your real
question, we
name.
would. But if we,
Yeah.
but if you have a question you'd like us to
Yeah.
address, we certainly
Yeah,
can.
if we've veered off, if we're not being interesting, feel free to redirect us with a question.
I mean, I think talking about like the latitude in astrology using music and the analogy of time versus rhythm is interesting. But if that's not your thing, maybe as the show adapts, alternative voice and perspective might get added. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't see a reason why not. You might have other people on the show. You might have.
I gotta say, I'm really enjoying the sound of your voice right now, Patrick. I'm just like that alone. You could be saying any words in the language, and I'd be really enjoying that.
Diarrhea.
Look, we set up the live stream to just sort of talk to each other and have people listen if they wanted to. So we sort of didn't want to take on the responsibility of having to be interesting, having to be entertaining, having to be just we're two astrologers who like to talk astrology, which most of the time we do, although the conversation wanders off. We get mostly positive feedback, but yeah, like it's
I
not
can't
it's not
imagine we're for everyone.
yeah, we're not for everyone. And it's not like the days when there were only like 3 TV stations and you were stuck watching something you didn't really want to. If you don't
Yeah,
enjoy us,
please. Yeah, please.
yeah.
Yeah, find something that is better suited for you.
Yeah, there's loads of, and yeah, if it's too male, we can't apologize for being men. We're not, we are who we are, and we
I
just
don't
want to
know that
talk to
we're
each
being
other.
asked to do that, but I understand what you mean.
It's coming up. It's
Um,
coming up. It's sort of, we're going to be us, and yeah, we're not for everyone. And if we're not, we don't apologize for it. We deliberately didn't want to take on the pressure of having to do anything other than what we like to do. Patrick and I like to chat, and we like to talk astrology and just sort of, think out loud. I personally, I mean, what I get out of this relationship is, I'm not just sort of dealing with with my own thoughts. Patrick's feedback, the work that Patrick does parallel to mine is always interesting to hear about. His feedback to whatever I have to offer is really useful to me. And we just hope, there's enough people. I mean, we put it out there. There's, it's not a structured astrology class. No one's paying, therefore no one needs to ask for a refund. Yeah.
So, someone, Crushed Orchids, actually brought up a really interesting point. They said, "I'm interested to see how the coming transits affect people by generation. Some age groups are panicking, some denying, some trying to plan ahead." That's that's really interesting because I think these transits do mean different things to people at different stages in their lives, and I think that's often a variable which is overlooked when people are like consuming say like rising sign horoscopes for the general population. These, like, a Venus retrograde will mean something very different from say a 16-year-old versus a 48-year-old versus
Yeah, sure.
a 72-year-old. These are these aren't always going to be the same types
But I
of
think,
things.
actually there is a good point though. The Venus retrogrades, like when I was younger, the Venus retrograde, the red 5, used to happen in Virgo to Leo. So it used to go over some of my Virgo planets. And for people who are maybe like 10 years older than I am, it was going over their natal Plutos. But the further we get into the Venus retrograde cycle, the more as the Venus retrogrades are happening in Leo and earlier in Leo, they're crossing the natal Plutos and or Uranuses of older and older people. So like, think about it. Like,
Oh,
it's been, think about it. It's been backwards. Like
right.
like I have Pluto and Uranus in the third decan of Virgo, by which point when I was born, Venus retrograde wasn't happening there anymore. But there are people who are just like, say born in 1963 who have Pluto and Uranus much earlier in Virgo. And that Venus retrograde used to go over their Uranus and Pluto's every 8 years. And then as time has gone on and the retrogrades happen earlier and earlier, nowadays the Venus retrograde is going over the natal Plutos of people who are in their late 60s, early 70s, and so forth. So
That's really interesting.
so there's something about that whole dance that is interesting.
Looks like Monica Raymond has said, I went down the wormhole and checked the Venus phase and interval of all writers I could think of. There were very few red ones, a great number of blacks, and a large blue group, notably Blue 5.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've looked at a fairly large number of authors. Definitely not that many. The one red author I can think of is Kurt Vonnegut was a red too, and I'm a really big Kurt Vonnegut fan. And I'm studying his life, but it's true you don't get that many. Let me see here. I've got a list of writers. Maybe I can add to that conclusion. And of course, I better share my file, share my screen. Okay.
Oh, by the way, we should probably prepare the Venus retrogrades by house.
Oh, yes.
Because I think there was a lot of interest in that, and we didn't touch base after the last session. So
yeah, we didn't touch base about that. I did give it some thought when I was out for a walk the other day. But yeah, I maybe we really try and dedicate next week's episode to that, and then it won't be like a word salad. Sorry, here's my writer's file. I'm just looking at the Venus retrogrades here out of all the writers I have. So yeah, Elizabeth Wurtzel, who wrote Prozac Nation, Naomi Wolf, Tama Janowitz. I'm going in reverse direction here. So playwrights like August Wilson and Sam Shepard, H. Rap Brown, who was a Black Panther, who wrote his autobiography. I can't tell you the title of that autobiography because it's like, yeah, never mind. Google it if you must know. It's not something I'm cleared to say. Ken Kesey, Eldridge Cleaver. So there's Gloria Steinem. So I guess I'm getting a lot of these sort of, Anne Frank was a red one. A lot of these people who stir things up with their writings. Although I guess many writers do. James Baldwin, Stan Lee. There you go. And there's Kurt Vonnegut, Farley Mowat. And then as I go further deeper into the classics, Dylan Thomas, Mervyn Peake, Richard Wright, Ian Fleming, Sartre, Lillian Hellman, John Steinbeck, Lindbergh. I'm not sure why I called him a writer. I guess he did
he's
write.
a writer?
Yeah,
I thought he was a pilot.
Yeah, he's a pilot.
An anti-Semitic pilot.
He's an anti-Semitic pilot, but I think he did write something. There must be some reason how he wound up on my writer's file, or maybe I'm mistaken. Langston Hughes, Zelda Fitzgerald, the guy who wrote the Little Prince, the Saint-Exupéry, C.S. Lewis, Thornton Wilder, Mao Zedong. I guess he did have his little red book. Jean Cocteau, John Reed, Khalil Gibran, Carl Sandburg, Paul Valéry, Paul Claudel, Yeats, Robert Louis
So
Stevenson.
you're saying these people are all...
These are all Venus retrograde people. So these are all red interval people. Yeah, Robert Louis Stevenson is a red 2. Bram Stoker is a red 5. Leo Tolstoy is a red 3. Ivan Turgenev is a red 2. Tennyson was a red 1. Elizabeth Barrett Browning was a red 4. Gogol was a red 1. William Cullen Bryant, for some reason I have him twice here. He's a red 2. And then Cyrano de Bergerac is a what is that? I guess he's a red 2, but in the 1600s, it's in like March. Nostradamus looks like he's a red 5. So yeah,
that's pretty
so
impressive that you have been able to identify the intervals even as far back as
yeah, it's a little
18th
trickier
century.
once you go back a few hundred years, but I can still kind of do it because I can identify the years. But this is like out of a file of 518 writers, by no means complete or definitive, just my own sort of collection. Yeah, it's 1/5, so it's a slightly under. You should be seeing 25% if it was like if there were as many red interval writers as anyone else. Unfortunately, I don't yet have the software to just instantly classify what each person in this file, what interval they were.
It's wild too, because you'd think that would be like a really elementary thing you'd want to be able to search for in a given file. I mean, yeah, I know you
Yeah,
you kind of work around there using the speed.
yeah, but that's yeah, it would be great also just to be able to calculate all the intervals for everyone. Roberta, the table of the intervals is I put it in chat earlier. People are always wanting to know, but Astro-Seek. Yeah, Goethe was he a red 3? I think he was a red something. I thought Goethe was a red 5. Hold on a second. Let me double check that. I should probably take her at her word, but here we are. Goethe. No, it looks to me like Goethe's a red 1. I think we're both wrong. Yeah, he's a red 1. If he is 1749. No, he's not a red at all. What am I saying? He would be a black 1. Yeah, he's a black 1. Not a red interval at all. Okay, sorted. Got that straightened out. Okay. Okay. Right.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm running out of steam. I've got a client in a little way.
Okay.
Hi, Soto77. Yeah, well, word salads aside, I think we covered a lot of territory here. As always, it's just a gas to talk. We're glad people enjoy it. Like we said, we didn't. What's this last one? That modern Goldilocks. Is Venus retrograde significant to charts with any planet, any sign, as long as it's the same degree of the Venus retrograde? I'm trying to sort of sort out that question.
Is Venus retrograde significant to charts with any planet in any sign as long as it is the same degree of the retro Venus, even if there is no line of sight between the planets? In other words, Venus stationing retrograde at 28 degrees of Leo.
And if you
have 28 degrees, if you had like say Jupiter at 28 degrees of Virgo, is that significant?
Oh,
I would think you would still need a line of sight for it to be considered a
yeah,
aspect.
Yeah, but I've got Ariel's book. I've looked through it. I don't remember coming across that specific claim. I wouldn't think so, but I'd like to see how Ariel sort of phrases it and what sort of case she lays out for that. Certainly, everything I did see in her book when I went through it felt consistent with how I've been, discovering Venus over the course of my investigation. So I don't see any sort of real major clash between her approach and mine. Like I said, she's looking at those conjunctions, and I'm just looking at the broader cycle. All right, people are loving the
salad comments. Well, I'd much rather us be talking about this kind of salad and not other kinds of salad.
Yeah, no, I was going to say people have been tuning in to watch us toss each other's salad.
Bye.
I went
All
there.
right.
I went there. How did we started this conversation with something really naughty? Oh yeah, Gordon Ramsay, of course. Yeah,
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 yeah.
Gordon Ramsay. Oh geez, we're back
Um,
in that territory. Hey,
all
Venus is
right.
retrograde, folks. There's gonna be some
Yeah,
references to
we're
tossed
so
salads
close. We're so
and
close.
motivations to cook and all that. Okay, all right. Well, thank you, Patrick, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Patrick, who are you?
I'm Patrick Watson. I'm an astrologer. I can be reached for consultations, and I have a bunch of articles on my website at patrickwatsоnastrology.com, and it's now working. So,
Okay, okay, good, good, good. Yeah, I saw that your site was down. I am Nick Dagan Best. I can be found at nickdaganbestastrologer.com. I'm also available for consultations and tutoring. Um, I I have a brand new website that wasn't down. We managed to design my new site while my old site stayed up and did an instant transfer. But I've got a brand new website. It's very beautiful. If I don't say so myself, I can say it because I didn't design it. I just got someone else to do it. Yeah, and I don't have any articles up there yet, but there's a bunch that I've been meaning to put up in the videos and stuff. So I still have some work developing it. But yeah, come check out my site. If you're interested in a consultation, you can find me there. Also, my YouTube channel, I make YouTube videos. And Patrick and I meet here every Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. I do my solo live stream tomorrow, same time, 11 to 2. I'm going to have Sam Reynolds as a guest on my solo live stream
wow.
a week from tomorrow, but we'll be starting an hour earlier at 1 p.m. Eastern and 10 a.m. Pacific. That's a week from tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm going to start at my usual time. And no, Nick doesn't offer discounts for Venus retrograde natives. Nice
If anything, get
try.
charged more. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. If anything,
Just kidding.
you pay double because it's double the Venus. uh, no, no. Alas, I treat you all equally. That's how I price things. I charge for my time. That's all. I charge an hourly rate and don't get complicated beyond that. Okay, so yeah, Patrick Watson astrology.com, Nick Dagan Best astrologer.com. Check us out. And yeah, come back to our live stream next week and we'll banter and toss salads all around the place. And
And talk about Venus through the houses. I think we should make that a
yeah,
goal.
we're going to make it a goal to talk about Venus retrograde through the 12th houses. That'll be our homework assignment for next week. So please do join us. And yeah, I hope to see you all on my solo stream tomorrow. All right, folks, have yourselves a great Sunday and bye for now.